process of CFATF and FATF. As a result of the passage of the AML-CFT Amendment Bill 2015, which included the controversial areas from the 10th Parliament, this bill designated the National Assembly and the Committee of Appointment as the means through which the 10 persons would be appointed to be on the AML-CFT Authority and the appointment of the FIU Director, Deputy Director, Accountant and Lawyer of the FIU. Although the PPP was opposed to these amendments since the 10th Parliament, it is complying with the law which the APNU-AFC passed and is therefore part of the Committee of Appointment and has been pushing the process along. Despite accusations by the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs that the opposition has not been cooperated and blamed the opposition for the process not being completed in a GINA report several weeks ago, the record of the COA will vindicate us, the opposition members in that committee. One may want to note that the AG, Minister of Legal Affairs, is not a member of this committee. Despite announcements by the AG and the Minister of Legal Affairs in the National Assembly during the debate on the latest amendments to the AML-CFT Amendment Act 2015, in response to accusations of the government that the FIU was headless, with no director nor deputy director, the AG stated that there was an acting director who he named. Then again, over 2 weeks ago, the minister stated the process of the selection of the FIU director and deputy director was completed. The fact is that the COA has not completed the process of selecting persons for the 4 positions as required in the Act. Once completed, these names have to be put formally to the House for its approval. The committee appointment has agreed on the organizations to invite to submit nominees for its consideration for the 10 names that have to be put to the House for its approval for the AML-CFT Authority. The Committee of Appointment is still awaiting submissions of 10 names from the relevant civil society organizations for these 10 nominees to the AML-CFT Authority. Therefore, there is no AML-CFT Authority, nor is there an effectively functioning and operating FIU. Rather, there is a headless FIU with staff. Even the person who the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs identified in the House as the acting director has not been appointed as such in the interim. According to the AML-CFT Amendment Act 2015, the director has specific responsibilities that actually triggers and causes key and critical aspects of the Act to become operational. No one else in the FIU has such authority. Therefore, the minister's claims and possible even report to the FATF is misleading. Furthermore, we noted the Attorney General reported that at the recent meeting of the FATF in Korea, Guyana, that Guyana was, quote, cleared to exit FATF and CFATF regimes, unquote. You will note that after every meeting, FATF issues a public statement summarizing the important decisions that it has made in respect of each country that is under its review process. And you would have noted that in June 24, 2016, public statement that it states a number of items that Guyana has made improvements, but it also points out that Guyana has substantially addressed its action plan at a technical level, including by, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 4th item is establishing a fully operational, effectively functioning financial intelligence unit. The same report goes on to state that FATF will conduct an on-site visit to confirm the process of implementing the required reforms and actions is underway to address deficiency previously identified by the FATF. The fact is that, The fact is that nothing in this report states that Guyana was cleared to exit FATF and CFATF regimes. Only Myanmar and Papua New Guinea have been cleared to exit the FATF monitoring and targeted review process in June 24 review of the FATF. The statement, therefore, that Guyana has substantially addressed its action plan at a technical level, including 4, establishing a fully operational, effectively functioning FIU, poses many problems and is perplexing. One needs to go back to look at the statements, public statements of FATF before the end of 2015, when in fact there was a functioning FIU. But since the end of December, that has not been the case. And I retrieve back to the FATF October 23, 2015 public statement, where it points out that one of the deficiencies that remain to be addressed is establishing effective measures, ensuring a fully operational and effectively functioning FIU. The February 19, 2016 statement of FATF on Guyana does not mention any of the 4 points stated in October or June 2016. Therefore, it appears that the FATF was told somewhere along the line by somebody that the FIU is now functioning. Thus far, the National Assembly has made none of the aforementioned appointments. As we pointed out, that the process is not completed, there is no AML CFT authority in place, there is no management committee of the FIU Intelligence Committee in place, there is no FIU in place. There are staff members who are at the lower levels of the body. We note the statement that FATF has made that they will be having an on-site visit to verify the implementation of the action plan, and we in the PPP welcome this visit and look forward to them coming to Guyana. The attempt by the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs to shroud the issue of FATF with confusion and misinformation is unacceptable on a matter of such national importance to our country. The second item is, of course, the pending issue of my privilege motion on Minister Trotman and Prime Minister Nagamutu with accusing them of misleading the nation with regards to the forest lands of Guyana and their statements that all the lands, forest lands of Guyana, had been given away by the former government. The Speaker was expected to have ruled at the June 30th sitting. I had received a letter and an email from the Parliament Office stating such, but nothing happened. One has to wonder why he did not do so, especially as few people, including us, expect to be surprised by his ruling. However, it should be noted that the Speaker upheld the motion of the APNU AFC government that a prima facie case had been made out with regard to figures used by the PVPC MP Bishop Edgehill during the 2016 budget debate to send him before the Privilege Committee. The motion I have brought to the House are based on figures used by the Prime Minister and Minister Trotman, which have been debunked by figures from the Guyana Forestry Commission and the Norwegian Independent Monitoring and Review Process. The two matters are comparable based on the nature of the accusations of misleading the House. We are, however, not holding our breath. The third issue, response to questions to ministers are unsatisfactory. Outside of the Speaker refusing to allow an opposition question seeking to know the names of 60-odd prisoners who were granted presidential motions as an abuse of the right of questioning, the government ministers seem to feel that they are above the law and do not need to even pretend to offer a plausible answer in the National Assembly. If one examines the answers to the questions asked by MP Anil Nandalal to Minister Jordan regarding the $5 billion write-off of liabilities DDL owed to the Guyana Revenues Authority and other write-offs unknown to other companies and individuals, the ministers provided answers that are totally unsatisfactory. The minister hides under a clause of the law which relates to functionaries of the GRA and not to the legislature nor the judiciary. I remind you that the cases that we referred to in the letter to the question to Minister Jordan were heard before the judiciary, in which the disclosure by GRA was known to and in the courts. Minister Jordan holds to the point that unauthorized release of information therefore prohibits him from stating to the legislature what was the nature and the reasons for the write-off, including what were aspects, additional areas of write-off that were not covered by the court case. It is clear that Minister Jordan does not seem to comprehend the role and function of the legislature to ensure that the government of the day is accountable for its actions and provides to public through the legislature or through the media issues raised by its elected representatives. We have another case of this refusal to provide information, and I just on the points of the questions asked by Mr. Nandalal to Minister Jordan, the question on the write-offs is again one that covers under the issue of Section 24 of the GRA Act, which is totally irrelevant in relation to the questions asked by Mr. Nandalal in the House. Minister Vulcan repeated his refusal to answer questions and continues to break promises to provide requested information that he made during the 2015 and 2016 review of the estimates, and, more recently, the supplementary financial paper on June the 30th. Regrettably, he is not alone, and he and his colleagues' lack of accompanying technical officers, rather than indicate their unpreparedness, actually belies, I believe, their disinterest, and hence lack of desire to be accountable in providing information to the people of this country. The next issue has to do, which we repeat consistently, is the demand for large and complex bills going to parliamentary special select committees. This is still being denied by the new AFC parliamentary representatives. The most recent example is the insurance bill, as several others in the last 11 months have not been sent to parliamentary select committees. There are issues in the insurance bill that required further examination by a parliamentary select committee. This was denied. There is no indication that the three bills pending on the order paper, wildlife, conservation and management, telecoms and PUC, will be heading for parliamentary special select committees, as they ought to, due to their size and complexity. These bills alone cover over 500 pages of legislation. It is unthinkable in any parliamentary democracy that such bills would not be subjected to scrutiny by parliamentary select committees. A new development in terms of a recent statement by Minister Walter Lawrence on double dipping of pension and the focus on interior pensions, especially Region 9. In regards to a statement this morning, an article this morning in Kayachio News, the minister seems to be unaware of the constitutional and legal conundrum she has opened up with regards to statement made in today's KN with regards to persons that, as she claims, are double dipping. First of all, one's pension in Guyana is protected in the Constitution for contributions made as an employee. That cannot be touched. The same in other countries. Therefore, if a Guyanese, as defined within the Constitution, earn their pension in another country, it cannot be considered double dipping if they apply and are approved for the non-contributing old age pension in Guyana, which is provided for under the Poor Relief Law. This is the same government that is encouraging people from the diaspora and yet now are creating further disincentives. Is the minister aware that many Guyanese return here to live in Guyana after long years of toil and cold weather and hardships to live here on the pensions they have duly earned in another country, and most have to return every 6 months to keep that benefit available? By her statement of a 2-year residency clause, they would then become ineligible for the old age pension. The old age pension, by the way, dates back in law over 100 years, and it was meant to help the poor and vulnerable, who may not have earned a public service pension, an NIS pension, any private pension, or even a parliamentary pension. The PPP removed the means test, which had stated prior to 1994 that if one was earning a pension, one would not receive the old age pension. The majority of persons who earn the old age pension are poor and need it and look forward to it to help them survive. Is the minister, by a statement, returning to the pre-1992 position of the PNC government of stating one can only have one pension? The statement in the papers focuses on people in the interior, especially those who live on the borders of Suriname, Brazil, and Venezuela. This is the same government that she belongs to that promised that the old age pension would be increased to 20,000. This was an election promise. Instead, it was increased to 18,000. It seems as if the minister is unaware of the Bureau of Statistics calculations and projections of the number of persons over 65 in Guyana. The number of applicants have never surpassed that projection and in most cases fall under. Interestingly, the minister did not focus on the 1% who are upper middle class people who also apply and who also receive old age pension, but instead she focuses on the interior residents, most of whom are Amerindians and most of whom are unable to earn NIS pensions. Instead, she declared that people collect from 2 administrative regions. If the minister knows anything about the interior of Guyana, this is highly improbable, as the traveling costs would be more than the actual contributions of the old age pension for that individual. Is this another assault on Amerindian communities? Having terminated the 1972 CSOs, redeployed the 6,064-watt solar panels purchased under the PEP civic government for the Interior Household Electrification Program to now the Minister Presidency and State House. Abolished the We Care program of $10,000 for each child enrolled in the public education schools, slowed to a halt the land titling program, fired the entire Amerindian land titling unit almost a year ago, appears to have replaced the school uniform program for the 3Bs, which only apply to a small number of children and not to all children in Guyana. And I could go on listing all the issues and the benefits and whatever social safety nets were extended to the poorest people of this country, the Amerindians, under the PEPC government. But I will stop at that question. Again, this is another case of transparency and lack of disclosure of information. And it is a total disregard for the people, especially the poor in our country. Every morning one opens with some anxiety in reading the newspapers of Guyana to see what new announcements will be made or pronouncements will be made by the government, with no accountability, no consultation, no transparency. And of course, just to end with the questions asked by the Leader of the Opposition in regard to questions raised with Minister Trotman with regard to GRIF funds and the LCDS. Again, the Minister has been unable to answer why isn't the multi-stakeholder steering committee of the LCDS, why is it not functioning, what is the position of the government at LCDS and what does it take on it, or is it been replaced by greening and whatever that means, why has the LCDS website which provided central information on matters regarding climate change, LCDS and the Norway partnership been taken down, why has the government and through the minister placed an additional 2 million hectares, an area 6 times the size of Irrakrama, of tropical forest to conservation? Why was the public uninformed about this? How did they determine this? Who did they consult? And why was it necessary? And where are these areas? Where will the 2 million hectares be found? Clearly, there was no requirement for Guyana to add an additional 2 million hectares. None whatsoever, as Guyana was the country with the lowest deforestation in the world, one of the lowest in the world. There was no such obligation to do so. Guyana continues to make mistakes and blunders into situations, and this government blunders into situations both at the international and the national level, merely because they refuse to accept that consultation provides collective wisdom and buy-in to what the government wishes to do. Without consultation, without transparency, without accountability, this government will continue to embarrass us, blunder at different levels, and continue to undermine the gains that Guyana has made over the last years. Thank you. We can open the floor for questioning.
Mr. Chair, what are the implications when FATA does visit and realizes that we don't have a functioning FIU, given what they've been told?
Well, first of all, one assumes that they're coming tomorrow. If they come before the process in Parliament is completed, then they will find an FIU that is headless. If they take many months to come, they may very well end up coming where the parliamentary process is completed and that the persons have been installed in their positions. So it really depends on when the FATF sends an on-site team to visit. There are other issues that they obviously have to look at as well.
If I can recall, Hannah,
Yes.
last night news, we were at a press conference with the AG on Saturday.
Yes.
And he said that the on-site visit is scheduled for between the 15th or the 16th of September. So with that date in mind, and based on what you just said, is it possible to also make this? Okay?
If we can complete our process by recess, before recess, yes. It would be probable. I wouldn't say yes firmly, because one has to remember that the persons who have been selected or are being selected also have to give notice of where they're working. And so I can't say conclusively that we are aiming as a committee of appointment to conclude our process before recess. And we are pleased that finally, for the first time, we have from the Chief Whip the dates for the next parliamentary sitting. So we know there's a sitting on July 18th, August the 4th, and August the 8th, of which we're aiming to catch those prior to the recess.
The AG did say let's say two.
But why didn't the articles in the press have this date? Because, you know, we only know this, well, I must have missed it, I'm sorry. Yeah.
He did say too that there are certain institutions that will be visited, like banks, Hawks, and so forth. To the best of your knowledge, are we really ready for this visit? I mean, apart from looking at the FIU.
Remember, the FIU looks at the legislative and architecture of anti-money laundering and countering the financing. So they're looking at, one, the legislative instruments to make sure they are in compliance. Secondly, they look at the administrative mechanisms that are in compliance with the law. How do you deal with suspicious transactions, the reporting mechanism, the UN Security Council, I think 1973, how are those being addressed? And are the banks, have there been sufficient training and manuals and protocols, those administrative issues? Then the third area, obviously, is in terms of the investigative arm and the prosecutorial capacity to manage these cases. So there are a number of, say, basic thematic areas they will go through, and they will look for loopholes in whether the law provides or doesn't provide, where are the weaknesses. Now, if you will have read the FATF announcement of public statements of the Korean meeting, June 22nd, 24th, you would see that they have now included a new amendment on non-governmental organizations. And so although we amended our Friendly Societies Act to bring it in compliance with what was the last review, it appears from their new recommendation that there will have to be further tightening of NGOs, and we only have the Friendly Societies Act. So it's highly probable that that would become now another requirement. And so this is an ongoing process. The main focus at this time is to Guyana to come out of the targeted review by FATF. And if you go through between October last year, February, and June this year, a number of countries are coming off of the review by FATF and then go back to be reviewed as normal by their regional bodies. So, and there's some countries that are coming down the line and look as if they will be coming off. But the statement by the AG, which is reported in the press, that Guyana has been cleared to exit, there is no such evidence whatsoever in the statements of FATF of that. And as I said, only Myanmar and Papua New Guinea. It may be that someone misinformed the minister that Guinea was Guyana.
When you talk about the investigative arm, we have SOCU is the body that was set up to support the FIU. We've seen SOCU acting without knowing who's directing or who's triggering the actions, given that that's supposed to be what the FIU director does. And we still to see protocols. It's been months. We've been promised protocols by the minister since February, I think it was last. Will that have an implication on the FATF review?
The concerns of FATF have to do with, one, that the FIU is not interfered with. The FIU has its own independence, and therefore the comments made by the assessor since 2014 and 2015 of the concerns about the autonomy of FIU by the proposed amendments at that time by the AP and UFAFC. So that's one of their main concerns, that FIU is how do you say, encased from contamination. And that's why even in the process of the committee is to ensure that the people who have applied, and a lot of people applied and responded to the advertisement, that they're not peeps, politically exposed persons, or connected in any way to politically exposed persons. And of course, even in the committee was to understand what that meant based on FATF definitions. And for a number of the applicants, there were persons who applied that were politically exposed that could not be considered. So that was a whole new thing. So the FIU is an issue. The SOCU and the whole, what you call raison d'etre for SOCU, is to be the investigative arm of the FIU and cannot operate alone. And therefore, if there are suspicious transactions, the banks trigger that information to the FIU. The FIU then has its own internal mechanisms to investigate it, including dealing with FIUs in other countries, Interpol, etc., and then is supposed to then pass it to SOCU to then run with it from a further investigation with a view to possible prosecution. How the question we are asking, which is similar to the one you're asking, who is giving directions to SOCU? How is SOCU deciding who should be questioned, who should not be? And this is a very dangerous trend in our country, especially in the sense that FIU is headless, and therefore who is giving the directions?
Minister Adam Harris, you just talked about, you just talked about the suspicious transactions and the banks having their own internal mechanisms and all that. But were those internal mechanisms ever triggered? Because I remember prior to May 11th or whenever, there were reports of 832 suspicious transactions,
Yes.
and I remember asking about them, and no one could say what happened with them, whether they were just dead.
Yeah. Remember, too, that the one part I left out is that it is the DPP's office that, if they're criminal offenses, that then runs with the AML-CFT. So that without the existence of SOCU then FIU used to send directly to the DPP to see if there was a case that could be made. As you know, many times there is suspicion, but you don't have enough evidence to prove it. The 2009 bill that came in through a parliamentary select committee was based on a recognition of weaknesses in the AML-CFT that had existed in the Prevention of Anti-Money Laundering Act of, 1997-98. And therefore, 10 years later, we brought in a brand new act. By 2011, it was found that there were deficiencies in terms of clearly how people open bank accounts. So it became more stringent in how you could open a bank account, how much money you could take abroad, and even the definition of what you consider the 10,000 limit or declaration of it at the thing. And then obviously then detailed requirements of the banks in terms of providing suspicious information on suspicious transactions. And so the fact that that bill was delayed from 2011 to 2015 therefore meant that banks knew that there were deficiencies, but there was nothing in the law to require them, basically. I remember after the October 2014 meeting with FATF, former Minister of Legal Affairs and Attorney General, to try to assuage the concerns of FATF, made what were called orders and administrative orders that were put out and sent to the banks, GRA, all these other bodies that actually repeated what was in the law that we couldn't pass, so that we could try to abide by FATF and show some level of compliance. FATF recognized the effort that we were making. However, they felt that if challenged by law, they could not stand up. And therefore, with this delay of this period, particularly 2012 to 2015, becomes critical in which the deficiencies Guyana had. And we have to remember, it is what happened in Parliament, the 10th Parliament. All these arguments I've made, and you've heard them in Parliament, about the absolute critical, essential, absolute necessity for Guyana to pass these things. In 2013, it was defeated. If one could say that we were literally begging the first time the bill was defeated, we were, unabashedly, because we knew what was going to happen. On the second round, of course, the role was to hold us to ransom in the committee, so nothing would move. And so a lot of what the state we're in now, and the fact that we've been under review from 2014 June to now, where some countries are coming out of being under FATF monitoring, has to fall into the responsibility of the AP and AFC, who refuse to put national interests first.
On the issue of the parliamentary special select committee,
Yes.
every single request that has been made by the political opposition to send these large bills to our committee has been rejected.
Yes.
When we have the telecoms bill, that's 300 odd pages.
Right.
The POC bill, that's
Yeah.
even bigger, I think.
Then the wildlife is another 100
and then
odd,
the
yeah.
wildlife bill. These are even bigger bills than the ones that have been
Yes.
not sent to select committee
Yeah.
before. Is there anything else that the committee can do to have a greater review of these large bills?
Well, the mechanism in the Parliament is obviously twofold. One, debate on the floor where the public gets to know what the arguments are. But basically you have little ability to amend the laws. We can bring amendments, which we have tried in other bills, which we felt strongly should go to Parliamentary Select Committee, and as you were, all those amendments were rejected. So that's one option. The section option, of course, and the preferable one is to go to Parliamentary Special Select Committee. The government's refusal to do that. So what do? We have two mechanisms in Parliament. First of all, this is a serious undermining of parliamentary democracy. These are issues that are almost treated sacrosanct in Commonwealth parliaments, that large and complex bills go to select committee based on the premise that collective wisdom and collective review plus inclusion of stakeholders outside of the parliament are critical to get the best that you can get. However, if that fails, then all we have is the public forums, the media, television, if we have access to that, our radio, and whatever public forums we can have to be able to inform the people about what is going on. But the government has shown an absolute reluctance, and reluctance I think is too mild a word, to have any engagement to amend and to recognize the weaknesses. I'll say this about the bills too. Some of you may remember in the last Parliament that a number of bills were amended by the opposition, by majority, to remove the role of the minister, the example of the money laundering, anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism bill, and place it in Parliament. Extraordinarily interesting now, and I just want to remind you of one bill that came to Parliament in the last Parliament by no less than Mr. Harman, who is now Minister, that wanted to amend the Broadcasting Act to remove the role of the government in terms of naming the board of the Broadcasting Authority and replacing with a parliamentary mechanism. You will notice that that's one of the few bills that the former opposition wanted to bring in the 11th Parliament that they have not, retabled for this Parliament. It's ironic, and it is telling. The new bills that have come forward, the Wildlife Bill, for example, which was drafted by our government, has been very radically amended to insert the authority of the minister on the commission that would be dealing with permits, licensing, inspection, etc. So the minister's role is extraordinarily intrusive, and in fact the minister seems to be treating the commission as a department rather than as an authority that is the scientific and regulatory authority for the wildlife import and exportation and conservation and management of it. Ditto with telecoms, so that they seem to have taken a double take. And one wonders if it's like the UK parliamentarian Mr. Farage, who had made certain promises in the lead up to the referendum on UK exiting the European Union, when he made certain promises to the British public about money that would be made available once the people supported the removal of Britain from the European Union. And the day after, when he was asked about when this would be made available, he then said, well, this was election time. This was a political issue, and he dismissed it as this was all par for the course during a political campaign. So one wonders if that is what all of that was, and basically just to attack the government, the PPC government, and now they're in government. We are seeing the institutionalizing and further ensconcing of ministers into direct operational areas of particularly regulatory bodies.
Do we have an idea,
Yeah.
Madam Treasurer, of the number of overseas resident Guyanese who could be affected by the old age pension issue?
I don't have the figures. We know from the Stats Bureau that the projections that the old age, the population that is 65 plus are in the vicinity of 42 to 43,000 in Guyana. Now, remember the Guyanese Constitution says that you're Guyanese, and whether you live here or not, you're Guyanese. And so even an example I give you is UG Council. A Guyanese person overseas can come and apply to the UG and pay Guyanese fees. They're not required to pay foreign fees because they are Guyanese. Therefore, that's why the point I made in the beginning is that Minister Valde is creating a constitutional conundrum. The other issue is that we don't have those stats. I would have assumed that the minister making such a leap, such a grand announcement, would have been able to say to the public, look, of these X thousand old age pensions we give out, we have 20%, 30% that are non-resident, and therefore we want to change this. There is no such information to validate or to verify such an action being done. And as I said, a lot of the older generation come back home because they have some pension they can live in from overseas. They come back home, they like the weather, they don't want to go through the cold weather, particularly in the north, and they can live comfortably, and they get their little old age pension. They're told it's available, they apply. They're not doing it illegally, they're not thieving. They apply, they're tested, and whatever criteria, and they get it. But they do have to go overseas every 6 months because they've got to keep their status, they've got to keep their, their social status and social, social security, that's the word. So why would you want to trouble these people? They have served in the countries, they've served us. They have a lot of Guyanese who also were public servants, who served this country, who went abroad and who come back to access their NIS, their public service pensions. Why would you want to interfere with this group? And worse yet, why would you want to interfere with a group living on the borders? And how many people are there that she's talking about who she thinks are getting assistance from Brazil and also Guyana? Is it 100? 1,000? What is the percentage? Because the number of Amerindians in the interior regions getting pensions is not a large amount. And in fact, for the last year, they have not dealt with any applications because the Board of Guardians were not set up until, say, in Region 9 or Region 8, only about 2 weeks ago. And they're all APNU people. All. So there's a pileup of application, people who became 65 in the last year, who are waiting. So what figures is she using? And in Brazil, they have very strong social welfare programs. Guyanese work across the border as typical border communities between Canada and United States, Buffalo and Toronto and Chicago and all. There are plenty border arrangements. People cross over every day to Boavista, work and come back to Letha. They earn their pensions or whatever benefits there. Why shouldn't they if they need it? Because my concern is that we do know that there are persons who get old age pension in this country who are upper middle class. They don't need it necessarily, not like ordinary people. They get it. Why are they not being targeted? If you do want to target anybody, why not target those who are at high office in this country, high office, high levels of the public service who have retired? Why would one gun for people on the borders who may work in both countries and who are not wealthy, just aren't. The other accusation she makes of some people having double dipping from two administrative regions. Because the context, and maybe it's the way the article is written, it appears to be interior people she's talking about. Maybe she's not. But it is improbable, it is highly improbable that someone is going to travel out. If you have to travel out of, you have your name down in Region 4 and you're in Region 9, you're going to travel out on a bus, $18,000, come to some part of Region 4, collect a pension under the same name. The database which was created there, it clearly identifies people. So double dipping by an individual with the same name is highly improbable in the first place, and secondly, it is improbable just from a financial point of view. Why would you spend $18,000 on Trans-Guyana? What do you call it? The Trans-Guyana coming out by bus. Go and collect $18,000, what, to pay to go back in? I mean, people aren't stupid, and I think you're treating them in a very disrespectful manner. And so this thing with the pensions is extraordinarily offensive. And again, it is another example. You wake up in the morning with some trepidation to read what's in the newspapers. It is only until the president signed the COP21 that you suddenly read about this 2 million hectares of land. And of course, in the interior, particularly in the Amerindian areas, and maybe this will come out at the National Two Showers Council meeting in July, the July 18th to the 22nd, where is this 2 million hectares coming from? Are we talking about lands that have been titled, lands that are requested for titling? Are we talking about forest and mining licenses? Where are we finding 2 million additional hectares from when we can't even deal with Irrakrama? And the last point on Irrakrama is that the GRIF funds and the LCDS funds, the Norwegian agreement, was designed to deal with a specific allocation for development of Amerindian areas, land titling, community development programs, etc., etc. We have read in the papers, and again, the papers is our main source of information. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Without you, we wouldn't know many things going on, and that's not a good idea. That's not a good thing for an opposition. It may be for the public to know what's going on, but for an elected officials with 4,526 votes difference of less than 1%, this is not a good form of governance of this country whatsoever. However, the issue is that there is a remark in one of the newspapers that GRIF funds would be used for Irrakrama. Irrakrama is moving, because remember, Irrakrama is an international project. It's an international gift of Guyana. How now is coming into the national domain, and therefore GRIF funds being allocated to be used in Irrakrama. These are issues that need to be clarified by the minister and the government, and certainly by the president, as these major global issues and impact on our people need to be taken in hand by the president, no less. Beg your pardon? Off topic? That gets scary.
Just three quick questions. General Secretary had said on Monday that there are 11 areas, 11 calls that for Amerindian development that the PPP is looking at. Is this just an initial call? Will it given, because you have spoken about different other areas.
Yes, certainly.
So is this just an initial call?
I think it's just an initial call that has been put forward, and it will be further developed and strengthened based on the involvement of more people in the interior areas, as well as at the leadership of the party.
And the other question that I have relates to a statement by the president last Friday on his public interest. As opposed to what the PPP had, it was investment-driven job creation.
Right.
We had, there was, what do you call it, BIT? Was BIT?
BIT, yeah,
BIT.
the Board of Industrial
Yeah,
Training and TVET.
The president's focus consistently has been on self-employment and, more entrepreneurs as his government's approach to creating jobs. Do you see, what's the opposition's take on this? given that we haven't really seen much job creation in the last year?
Well, one of the things that PPP focused on was pro-growth, pro-poor, and also the issue of recognizing government's role in creating economic activity, investments, and job creation, not only having opportunities for jobs, but actually creating new areas for new jobs, as well as creating more jobs. In addition to encouraging business entrepreneurship, so that it was a much more comprehensive approach, and obviously was also trying to attempt to strengthen the private sector and the business sector of Guyana. So it wasn't focused on government, the public sector providing more jobs, but moving away from what was the inheritance of Burnham and the reduction of the public sector over the years with the IMF, to be able to have more people employed at multi-layers of the society, private, self-employed, co-op, community, such as in the Amerindian areas, etc. The President's focus on self-employment is a little bit confusing, because if we take his words at true value, then one has to wonder, why is the government, through its elected bodies, such as the City Council, harming jobs of vendors? Vendors are self-employed people, the majority of whom are women in Guyana. And so you have this contradiction in what the government's saying and what the government's doing. It says, and the First Lady, I'm sure, means well in wanting to have women in entrepreneurs. However, you can't be doing, in one hand, having training programs for women in entrepreneurship, and at the same time making life horrendous and difficult for people, particularly women, who are vendors. Border, Stabroek, Kitty, just to name a few, and in other places where we see similar things going on. These are contradictions, what the government is saying and what it's doing, so that the fact that you have a large single percentage of households who are headed by women, why would you want to take money out of their mouth? These are women who have been running their businesses, they do their things, they pay their rent, or they put their children through school, and so on. Why would one not see them as entrepreneurs? We also ran programs recognizing there was a skills mismatch in Guyana, and this was done by the National Working Group on Public-Private Partnership for the Millennium Development Goals. This was grouping with one government representatives and the private sector bodies with the education institutions, looking at the mismatch. Was there a mismatch? So in other words, the government was training in the TVET programs, the Ministry of Youth Entrepreneurial Skills Training programs, people to, say, do carpentry or masonry or so on, when in fact the private sector needed, in construction, needed plumbers and wire benders and electricians more. And so that led to a lot of advocacy by that group to the private sector and the education institutions run mainly by the government to shift the training programs to meet the needs of the construction industry, of the information-based industry, and the engineering industry. So those were the two, that was the focus at that time. And so there were meetings with the the telephone companies. What was the training they needed? What was they looking for? And then to go back now to the Ministry of Education and the educational training programs, BIT, TVET, Youth Entrepreneurial Skills Training Program, to now design programs that could make them now eligible, because we found that we were producing people, and yes, there were people who could go and be a carpenter or a joiner and stuff, but there weren't enough opportunities, enough jobs to kick into that. And therefore, where the deficiency was, and the private sector had not admitted that they had not done the kind of assessment of what skills they needed, and so they could also in the beginning not say how many people they needed in particular skill sets. And so a lot of work went on by our government. What the President says of the focus on self-employment, people have to know what the market needs, even in self-employment. So again, the connection with Go Invest and the marketing bodies with the Ministry of Industry or whatever it's called now, to be able to know what are the needs in order to generate the skills and and persons who have those skills to meet them. Otherwise, it's a kind of flash in the pan, and the mathematical probability is that maybe out of every 10 people who are self-employed, 2 might hit the mark, and the other 8 are kind of not making anything out of it. So I think that the President's comments lack a comprehensive appreciation of what is needed to be able to have economic activity, drive economic activity, what drives it, how to drive it, how to have job creation, and also how to have self-employment. Let me just give an example which I'm familiar with, and I'm Mashramani, the love of my life and the love of my old ministry. When we try to reconstruct Mashramani and make it a people's festival for all people of Guyana, regardless of who they were, who they voted for, where they lived, we never recognized at that time the economic spin-offs. We never understood it in the beginning. It was just trying to get people involved and participate and felt there was space for them in something called Mashramani. By 2005, 4-5, we begin to comprehend that this thing has a whole backward integration of economic activity. If we just look at the costumes, we train people to make costumes, to do wire bending. So there were people who had a whole industry beginning of seamstresses and wire benders and carpenters, and people could make the floats and the children's costumes and all that whole area. The people who were involved in the catering, the people who ended up on the road with their little trays selling whatever food they made, and found out, to our surprise, that those little trays could make like $85,000 to $100,000 on mash day alone. And so the spin-off, people began to plan from Christmas when you're broke to how to have economic activity by February the 23rd. And so all the soca competitions, the calypso competitions, the masquerade competitions, all had people who gravitated to it, not just to be participants and spectators, but to actually see it as economic venture. By cancelling MASH this year and redeploying it to independence, it actually had a huge impact on the economy. It's a big impact, because by 2005, we were trying to calculate exactly the impact of MASH. The number of companies involved, the generation of all the advertisements, the whole marketing thing. We could calculate that from the marketing issues of MASH, including what companies gave in terms of awards and stuff, you're talking about $100 to $200 million was circulating around MASH, not the ministry. The ministry put in $16 million. That's what we put in MASH. And that was mainly in the masquerade, in the community activities to bring them into a thing, bring in the different, and then the ministries did their costumes, the Ministry of Education did the children. So when we add those figures to what the ministry put in, you're talking again of another $100 million being put in by government in a variety of layers, regions and ministries into Mashramani. So that taking one event and working it and building it created enormous economic spin-offs. Just like kite flying. You came across guys in Alboy's Town or Rivers View or whatever who knew that April every year they would make 4,000 or 5,000 kites. And they started months before. And that became a whole industry. They hired other people. So the kind of self-employment, it has to be imaginative. It has to fit the environment within which we're working. We don't need platitudes saying, yes, people, we want self-employment. People don't need to be told they need to be self-employed. People in Guyana are quite innovative and find ways of making money in a variety of ways. But one has to give them space and be lenient for them to do that. And then you begin to regulate them on what laws and taxes they have to comply with. But you've got to give them that space, leniency and flexibility to be able to get themselves up and running. Particularly, one woman show, one man show in a sense, one person making it. If you look at the housing sector, Again, another one where the spin-offs of that were phenomenal. Again, not anticipated. The number of bottom house, what do you call the concrete blocks, the block making. And of course, you're seeing now with the housing drive dropping enormously, what is done to the constructing sector, to jobs in the construction sector, as well as to these bottom house industries that really provided economic activity for hundreds and hundreds of people.
Madam Chair, by the way, who is the PPP representative on the board of directors of Guyana Revenue Authority?
We don't have anyone.
Oh,
No. No. Remember, our position has been that we have been invited to have representatives on some boards. I can't swear to you at this point that we have been invited to be on GRE. I can't swear that. However, there are a number of boards we have been invited to be on. GRE may be one of them. But our position from August last year to now is that we would not participate in what was witch hunting activities. And we would not be part of baptizing some of the wickedness that we saw emerging in June, July, and we would not participate in that. We are open as a party to review that as time goes on.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
quickly. The last time I spoke with the Minister of Communities, he told, I asked about the local government board, I think it is, local government.
Local, what are you asking, local government commission?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, not the local board of guardians.
Commission.
Yes, yes.
And I was told that the PPP has named its representative.
The letter is going off today.
So
The letter is going off today with our 3 names.
all right, and he also,
So we're in compliance. However, the motion for Parliament with the 1 name from Parliament won't come up until July 18th.
all right, and
We hope.
all right, and what about the meeting with the minister, the chief whip on the government side about the local authority areas? Where's the party with that?
That's still pending. That's still pending.
Because I know when I spoke with Minister Burkan, he said that he wasn't aware of a meeting ongoing, which I found a bit strange. He wasn't aware of a meeting between you and the chief whip. I have him on record.
Well, you know, this is becoming more and more habit in the government, or practice, or tradition in the government. After it becomes so long, it may be a tradition that left hand doesn't seem to know what right hand's doing. However, as you know, prior to the installment by the Minister of UPNU members as chair, vice chair, mayor, deputy mayor of the 6 tied local authorities, there had been discussions with Minister Ali and myself, based on the request of our party, and as far as you knew, the concurrence with President Granger. And that was public knowledge. We have returned to Minister Ali in June. She was going to be overseas, and she said she would let me know when she returned. Quite a long period passed, and I contacted her last week, and she said, yes, her government is prepared. They want everything in writing, and we're preparing a written document of the options we are proposing. So they should get that early next week.
What have delayed the submission that only today the letter is going across?
Democracy must work, you know. Democracy must work, not only in government, it must work in the party as well. And so the 3 names, there were names proposed, and you had to go to ask the persons, are you willing to take on this responsibility? What are the terms and conditions? And therefore, you just don't name people without asking them and getting their approval. So that process, you know, of selection, discussion, consultation, has completed, and the letter will be going off today. And so we had actually pushed the chief whip last sitting to bring up the local government commission motion, and she said no. So we are not late then, sir. We are still within order, because you still have to wait for the nominee from Parliament. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Did I keep you as long as Mr.